Grace stood at the kitchen window, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee mug as she gazed out at the neatly manicured lawn. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the dew-kissed grass, but the beauty of the scene was lost on her. Her mind was elsewhere, caught in a whirlwind of memories and emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. It had been 3 months since Owen had re-entered her life, and nothing had been the same since. At 45, Grace had thought she had her life figured out. A successful career as a high school principal, a comfortable home in the suburbs, and a circle of close friends. It was a life many would envy. But Owen's return had shaken the very foundations of her carefully constructed world. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be transported back to that fateful day when he walked into her office. Owen, now a renowned architect, had been commissioned to design the school's new library. The moment he stepped through the door, it was as if time had stood still. He was older, of course, they both were, but his piercing blue eyes and charming smile were exactly as she remembered from their college days. "Grace," he had said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else she couldn't quite place. "It's been a long time. A long time indeed. 23 years to be exact. 23 years since their passionate but tumultuous relationship had ended in heartbreak and regret. 23 years of trying to forget, of building a life that didn't include him. And yet, in that instant, it all came rushing back. The sound of footsteps pulled Grace from her reverie. She turned to see her daughter Lily entering the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Mom," Lily said, reaching for a piece of toast. "You okay? You look a million miles away." Grace forced a smile. "Just thinking about work, sweetie. Big day ahead." Lily nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to pry. At 17, she was perceptive beyond her years, a trait that both pried and unnerved Grace. "Don't forget, I have debate club after school. I'll be home late." "Of course. Good luck today." Grace watched as her daughter headed out the door, a pang of guilt twisting in her stomach. She hated lying to Lily, even if it was just a small omission. But how could she possibly explain the turmoil she was experiencing? As she prepared for work, Grace's mind wandered back to Owen. Their rekindled relationship had started innocently enough. Professional meetings about the library project, casual conversations about their lives since college. But it wasn't long before the old spark reignited, burning hotter and more intensely than ever before. Their first kiss had been electric, filled with years of pent-up longing and desire. It happened late one evening in her office after a particularly grueling budget meeting. Owen had stayed behind to go over some design details, and as they pored over the blueprints, their hands had brushed. The touch sent a jolt through Grace's body, and when she looked up, she saw her own hunger reflected in Owen's eyes. "Grace," he had whispered, his voice husky with desire, "tell me to stop. Tell me this isn't what you want." But she couldn't. She didn't want to. Instead, she had leaned in, closing the distance between them. The moment their lips met, it was as if the past 2 decades melted away. They were young again, reckless and passionate, consumed by a love that defied reason. From that moment on, they had been inseparable. Stolen moments in her office, clandestine meetings at out-of-the-way cafes, passionate encounters in hotel rooms. Their affair was all-consuming. Grace felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, perhaps ever. Owen awakened parts of her she thought had long since died, igniting a fire that threatened to burn everything in its path. But with the passion came the guilt. Grace was acutely aware of the lines she was crossing, the trust she was betraying. She was not only cheating on her husband, Mark, a kind, dependable man who had been by her side for 15 years, but she was also compromising her position as principal. If anyone were to find out about her relationship with Owen, it could cost her everything she had worked so hard to achieve. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to end it. The pull between them was too strong, the connection too deep. Owen understood her in a way no one else ever had. He challenged her, excited her, made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. As Grace drove to work that morning, her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of her secret rendezvous with Owen warred with the crushing weight of guilt and fear. She parked her car in her designated spot, taking a moment to compose herself before stepping out. The school loomed before her, a stark reminder of the responsibilities she bore and the trust placed in her. Walking through the hallways, Grace greeted students and staff with her usual warmth and professionalism. To the outside world, she was the picture of composure, the respected principal who had transformed the school into one of the best in the district. But beneath the surface, she was a maelstrom of emotions. As she approached her office, Grace's heart rate quickened. She knew Owen would be there, waiting to discuss the latest developments in the library project. These meetings had become the highlight of her day, a chance to be close to him under the guise of professional obligation. Sure enough, as she opened the door, there he was. Owen stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. He turned at the sound of her entrance, a smile spreading across his handsome face. "Good morning, Grace," he said, his voice low and intimate. Grace felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. "Good morning, Owen. Shall we get started?" They sat at her desk, ostensibly reviewing blueprints and budget reports. But as they worked, their hands would brush accidentally, their eyes would meet and linger. The air between them crackled with unspoken desire. "I missed you last night," Owen murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace felt a blush creep up her neck. "Owen, we can't. Not here." He leaned in closer, his breath warm on her ear. "I can't stop thinking about you, Grace. About us." She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to give in to her desires. "We need to be careful, if anyone found out." I know, Owen sighed, leaning back in his chair. "But sometimes I wonder if it would be so bad, if we could just be open about our feelings." Grace's eyes snapped open, a mix of fear and longing coursing through her. "You know we can't. There's too much at stake." The pain in Owen's eyes was palpable, and Grace felt her heart constrict. She wanted nothing more than to reach out and comfort him, to tell him that she felt the same way. But the risks were too great. Their meeting continued, the tension between them palpable. As Owen prepared to leave, he paused at the door, turning back to Grace with an intensity that took her breath away. "Meet me tonight," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The usual place, please, Grace, I need to see you." Grace hesitated, her sense of duty warring with her desire. But in the end, as always, Owen's pull was too strong to resist. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll be there." As the door closed behind him, Grace slumped in her chair, her head in her hands. How had her life become so complicated? How long could she continue living this double life before everything came crashing down around her? The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and administrative duties. Grace went through the motions, her mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Owen and their impending rendezvous. As the final bell rang and students streamed out of the building, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She sent a quick text to Mark, telling him she had a late meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. Another lie to add to the growing pile. The guilt gnawed at her, but it was overshadowed by the anticipation of seeing Owen. The usual place was a small, discreet hotel on the outskirts of town. As Grace pulled into the parking lot, her heart raced with a combination of excitement and fear. She glanced around furtively before making her way to room 212, their regular haven. Owen was already there when she entered, pacing the room with nervous energy. The moment he saw her, his face lit up, and he crossed the room in 2 long strides, gathering her in his arms. "Grace," he breathed, burying his face in her hair. "God, I've missed you." She melted into his embrace, all her doubts and fears momentarily forgotten. In Owen's arms, she felt whole, alive, like the person she was always meant to be. Their kisses were urgent, passionate, fueled by the knowledge that their time together was limited and precious. Clothes were shed with frantic haste, hands exploring familiar territory with renewed hunger. As they lay tangled in the sheets afterward, Grace traced lazy patterns on Owen's chest, savoring the warmth of his skin against hers. These were the moments she lived for now, these stolen pockets of time where the outside world ceased to exist, and it was just the two of them. "I wish we could stay like this forever," Owen murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Grace sighed, reality already beginning to creep back in. "You know we can't." Owen propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why not? Grace, I love you. I've never stopped loving you, not since college. We have a second chance here. Why can't we take it?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Grace sat up, pulling the sheet around her, suddenly feeling exposed in more ways than one. "Owen, you know why," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have a husband, a daughter, a career that I've worked my entire life for. I can't just throw all that away." "But are you happy?" Owen pressed, his blue eyes searching hers. "Really, truly happy? Because I see you, Grace. I see the fire in you, the passion. It's like you come alive when we're together. Can you honestly tell me you feel that way in your everyday life?" Grace looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The truth was, she couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly happy before Owen came back into her life. Her marriage to Mark had long since settled into a comfortable but passionless routine. Her job, while rewarding, often felt more like a burden than a calling. But was that enough reason to upend her entire life? To hurt the people who depended on her? "It's not that simple," she whispered, more to herself than to Owen. He reached out, gently turning her face back to his. "It could be. We could make it simple. Just you and me, Grace, like it was always meant to be." For a moment, Grace allowed herself to imagine it. A life with Owen, free from secrets and lies, waking up next to him every morning, building a future together. The thought was intoxicating, tempting beyond measure. But then reality came crashing back. The faces of her husband and daughter flashed in her mind, along with images of her students, her colleagues, all the people who would be hurt, disappointed, betrayed if she chose to follow her heart. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "Owen, I'm sorry, but I can't." The pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. He pulled away, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, his back to her. "So this is it then? We just keep sneaking around, stealing moments here and there, never able to truly be together?" Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. I don't have the answers, Owen. I just know that I can't walk away from my life, no matter how much a part of me wants to." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace watched Owen's back, the tension visible in every line of his body. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was one of resigned determination. "I understand," he said softly. "I don't like it, but I understand. I love you too much to ask you to give up everything for me. But Grace, I need you to know, I'm not giving up on us. I'll wait for as long as it takes, because what we have, it's rare, it's special, and I believe it's worth fighting for." Grace felt a fresh wave of emotion wash over her. Owen's words both comforted and terrified her. The depth of his love was overwhelming, a beacon of hope in the stormy sea of her conflicted emotions. As they dressed and prepared to leave the hotel room, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Their affair would continue, fraught with danger and secrecy, but fueled by a love that refused to be denied. The drive home was a blur for Grace, her mind replaying every moment of her time with Owen. As she pulled into her driveway, she took a deep breath, steeling herself to step back into her role as wife and mother. The house was quiet when she entered. A note on the kitchen counter informed her that Mark had taken Lily to her debate tournament, and they would be back late. Grace felt a pang of guilt. She had completely forgotten about Lily's tournament. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank onto the couch, the events of the day weighing heavily on her. How long could she continue living this double life? The strain was beginning to show, and she feared it was only a matter of time before someone, Mark, Lily, or someone at work, noticed that something was amiss. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a text from Owen. "Thinking of you, always." Grace stared at the message, her heart constricting. She loved Owen, of that she was certain. But was love enough to justify the web of lies and deceit she had woven? Was it fair to Mark, who had been nothing but loyal and supportive? To Lily, who deserved a mother she could look up to and trust? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway startled Grace from her reverie. She quickly deleted Owen's message and went to greet her family, pasting on a smile that felt increasingly false. "Mom!" Lily exclaimed as she burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "We won! We're going to the state finals!" Grace enveloped her daughter in a hug, genuine pride momentarily overshadowing her inner turmoil. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Mark followed behind, smiling broadly. "She was amazing, Grace. You should have seen her." The guilt hit Grace like a physical blow. She should have been there. She would have been if not for her secret rendezvous with Owen. "I'm sorry I missed it," she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Work has been so hectic lately with the new library project." Mark nodded understandingly, but Grace caught a flicker of something, disappointment, suspicion, in his eyes. "It's okay. I recorded some of it on my phone if you want to watch later." As they settled in for a late dinner, Grace found herself watching her family with new eyes. Lily, animated and excited, regaling them with tales of the debate. Mark, attentive and proud, every inch the devoted father. This was her life, the life she had built over years of hard work and commitment. Could she really contemplate throwing it all away? But even as she engaged in the conversation, laughing at Lily's jokes and discussing plans for the state finals, a part of Grace's mind was with Owen. She imagined him in his apartment, alone, perhaps nursing a drink and thinking of her. The thought sent a shiver of longing through her body. That night, as she lay in bed next to Mark, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of Owen, of their passionate encounters, of the future he had painted for them. But it also dwelled on her family, on the life she had here, on the responsibilities and commitments she had made. She turned to look at Mark's sleeping form, studying the face she had woken up next to for the past 15 years. He was a good man, a loving husband and father. He didn't deserve this betrayal. And yet, Grace couldn't bring herself to end things with Owen. The pull was too strong, the connection too deep. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Grace made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, living a lie, constantly torn between two worlds. Something had to change, but what and how? The next few weeks passed in a haze of heightened emotions and increasing tension. Grace threw herself into her work, using the library project as an excuse to spend more time with Owen while simultaneously trying to distance herself emotionally. It was an impossible task, and she found herself more conflicted than ever. Owen, sensing her inner turmoil, tried to give Grace the space she seemed to need while making it clear that his feelings hadn't changed. Their interactions at school became a delicate dance of professionalism tinged with unspoken longing. Every accidental touch, every lingering glance sent sparks of electricity through Grace's body, making it increasingly difficult to maintain her composure. At home, Grace found herself withdrawing from Mark and Lily, plagued by guilt and indecision. She threw herself into work, using late nights at the office as an excuse to avoid family dinners and intimate moments with her husband. Mark, initially understanding, began to show signs of frustration and concern. One evening, as Grace was preparing to leave for another late meeting, Mark confronted her in the kitchen. "Grace, what's going on?" he asked, his voice a mixture of worry and exasperation. "You're never home anymore. When you are, you're distant. Is there something you're not telling me?" Grace felt her heart race, panic rising in her throat. "It's just work, Mark. The library project is taking up a lot of my time. You know how important it is for the school." Mark's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "Is that all it is? Because it feels like there's more to it. Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Grace felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. She opened her mouth to deny it, to offer reassurances, but the words wouldn't come. The lie stuck in her throat, choking her. Her silence was all the confirmation Mark needed. His face crumpled, a mix of pain and anger washing over his features. "I see," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long?" Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mark, it's complicated. I never meant for this to happen." "Who is he?" Mark demanded, his voice rising. "Do I know him? Is it someone from work?" Grace remained silent, unable to meet her husband's gaze. Mark's hand slammed down on the kitchen counter, making her jump. Damn it, Grace. I deserve the truth. After 15 years of marriage, don't you think you owe me that much? The commotion had drawn Lily from her room. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Grace felt her world crumbling around her. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for months was shattering, exposing the ugly truth of her betrayal. Lily, go back to your room, Mark said, his voice strained. No, Lily replied, her tone defiant. I want to know what's happening. Why are you fighting? Grace looked at her daughter, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes. In that moment, the full weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She had not only betrayed her husband, but had also let down her child, the person she had sworn to protect and guide. I'm so sorry, Grace whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I've made a terrible mistake. The next few hours were a blur of painful confessions and raw emotions. Grace found herself pouring out the whole story. Her history with Owen, their rekindled relationship, the intense feelings that had led her astray. Mark listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. Lily, initially shocked into silence, eventually retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her. As the night wore on, the initial storm of anger and hurt gave way to a heavy, oppressive silence. Mark sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, while Grace leaned against the counter, feeling utterly drained and lost. What happens now? Mark finally asked, his voice hoarse from emotion. Grace shook her head, at a loss for words. I don't know, she admitted. I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you and Lily, you have to believe that. But you love him too, don't you? Mark's question was more of a statement, tinged with resignation. Grace couldn't deny it. Yes, she whispered. I do. Mark stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. I need time to process this. I think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else for a while. The words hit Grace like a physical blow, but she knew she had no right to protest. She had brought this on herself, on all of them. As she packed a bag, her hands shaking, Grace's phone buzzed with a message from Owen. Are we still on for tomorrow's meeting? The sight of his name on her screen sent a jolt through her body, a mixture of longing and despair. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it made her physically ill. The next morning, Grace arrived at school earlier than usual. She sat in her office waiting for Owen, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. When he entered, his face lit up at the sight of her, but his smile quickly faded as he took in her red-rimmed eyes and somber expression. Grace, what's wrong? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be one of the hardest conversations of her life. Owen, we need to talk. Last night, Mark found out about us. Owen's face paled. Oh, God. Grace, I'm so sorry. What happened? Are you okay? Grace shook her head, fighting back tears. No, I'm not okay. None of this is okay. Owen, we can't do this anymore. It has to end. The pain that flashed across Owen's face was almost unbearable. Grace, no, please, we can figure this out. We can't, Grace interrupted, her voice breaking. I've hurt too many people already. My husband, my daughter. I can't keep living this lie. Owen reached for her hand, but Grace pulled away. Please, don't make this harder than it already is. So that's it? Owen asked, his voice thick with emotion. You're just going to walk away from what we have? From us? Grace closed her eyes, willing herself to stay strong. I have to. For my family, for my career, for myself. I'm sorry, Owen. I truly am. As Owen left her office, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Grace felt as if a part of her was being torn away. But she also felt a glimmer of something else. Relief. The weight of her secret, the constant fear of discovery, was lifted. The following weeks were a blur of painful conversations, tears, and slow, tentative steps toward healing. Grace moved back home, sleeping in the guest room as she and Mark began the difficult process of rebuilding trust. They started couples therapy, confronting years of unspoken issues and resentments that had led to the vulnerability in their marriage. Lily, initially distant and angry, gradually began to open up as well. Family therapy sessions became a regular part of their lives, providing a safe space for them to express their feelings and work through the hurt caused by Grace's actions. At work, Grace threw herself into completing the library project, maintaining a strictly professional relationship with Owen. It was painful, seeing him every day, remembering what they had shared. But with each passing week, it became a little easier to remember why she had made the choice she had. As the school year drew to a close and the new library neared completion, Grace found herself standing alone in the almost finished building. She ran her hand along a shelf, marveling at how something so beautiful had come from such a tumultuous time in her life. It's really something, isn't it? Grace turned to see Owen standing in the doorway. It was the first time they had been alone together since their painful conversation in her office months ago. "It is," she agreed, offering a small smile. "You've done an amazing job, Owen." He stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "How are you, Grace? Really?" She considered the question carefully. "I am healing. It's not easy, but I'm trying to make things right." Owen nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Grace. I hope you know that." "So do you, Owen," she replied softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions and what-ifs. Finally, Owen spoke again. "I've accepted a job offer in Chicago," he said. I think it's time for a fresh start." Grace felt a pang in her chest, but she knew it was for the best. "I understand. I wish you all the best, Owen. Truly." As he turned to leave, Owen paused at the door. "I don't regret it, you know. Loving you. Even with all the pain, I could never regret that." Grace watched him go, a mixture of sadness and gratitude washing over her. Their relationship had nearly cost her everything, but it had also forced her to confront truths about herself and her life that she had long ignored. As she left the library and walked back to her office, Grace felt a sense of peace settling over her. The road ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding trust with Mark and Lily would take time and effort. Her career, while intact, would require careful navigation to overcome any lingering whispers or suspicions. But for the first time in months, Grace felt hope. Hope for her marriage, for her relationship with her daughter, for her future. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. That evening, as she sat on the porch swing with Mark, their hands tentatively intertwined, Grace looked out at the setting sun. The world was painted in hues of gold and pink, a reminder of the beauty that could follow even the darkest storms. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly, turning to look at her husband. Mark was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Then he squeezed her hand gently. "I think we will be," he said. "It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But I believe in us, Grace. I always have." As the last rays of sunlight faded, giving way to the soft glow of twilight, Grace allowed herself to believe it too. The past few months had been a journey through the darkest parts of her soul, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to the life she had chosen. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Grace was ready to face it, not with fear or regret, but with hope and determination. She had been given a second chance at love, not in the passionate, all-consuming affair with Owen, but in the steady, enduring love of her family. And this time, she wouldn't let it slip away. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Grace and Mark sat in comfortable silence, the gentle creaking of the porch swing a soothing rhythm. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for Grace, that was enough.